welcome to the Rethink Leadership podcast, available on all platforms including YouTube if you prefer to watch. My name is Jeremy Blain, CEO of Performance Works International, Executive Director of the Transformational Leadership Acceleration Institute, and Managing Partner of Diversity Talent. My aim is to bring insights from leaders, experts, and highly talented professionals from around the world. Insights, stories, and advice from the front lines of modern leadership to engage, inspire, and mobilize progress back in the workplace. Every episode is a learning opportunity for us all. The Rethink Leadership podcast also supports charities around the world. Each episode is in aid of a cause chosen by my guests, and to date, I'm proud to say we've supported over 60 global and local great causes. Today I welcome Tim Fortescue, a highly sought after transformational communication coach, helping leaders enhance their communication skills and lead with authenticity to drive meaningful connections and impactful outcomes. Tim's background in basketball coaching and his passion for helping individuals grow has taken him from a volunteer high school basketball coach to founding his own coaching venture, 40 Watt Coaching. Tim's coaching philosophy centres around coaching the full human, not just a person's speech patterns, and on how to build success through trust and openness. In today's episode, I speak with Tim on effective communication strategies for emerging and established leaders. Tim, thanks very much for joining me. Please tell us about yourself, your 40 Watt coaching business, and something about yourself that maybe not many people know.
I believe that everybody can be a better communicator. It's not the kind of thing that you're born with or that only some people have. It's a skill and it can be developed like anything else. So there's this mystification around communication and who's effective and who's a good leader, that's a leadership speaker. I get that some people are good at it in certain ways and bring certain strengths, but I think everybody can get better. So I started 40 Watt Coaching in 2021 with the idea that I want to help people not only get better as communicators, but see what they don't see about themselves in the process. Before I started 40 Watt Coaching, I worked for a larger firm that did communication coaching from about 2014 to right into the pandemic. And that company was called Own the Room. It's called Life Hikes now. And during those 5 years I was there, I got a chance to travel around the world and train thousands of people, leaders at really cool companies, big brands that people have heard of, and found myself in all types of different scenarios that I never dreamed I would be in. But I had so much fun doing it and also found a way to develop my own approach to it that I'm excited to be doing it now on my own. And then you asked about something that no one would know about me. I'm a big live music fan. And as a matter of fact, I take it to the level of geek, where I actually have a list of all the shows I've been to. I have been to, believe it or not, I actually looked before this podcast, and I have been to exactly 300 live music performances in my life. I'm going to be going to 301 in about 10 days. And so, yes, I'm a big live rock and roll music fan.
Wow. Well, that speaks to me. I have to say, music is in the blood for me too. And festivals and music events have been there. I can't say that I've been to 300 though, I have to say. So come on, I'm going to call you a professional then, all right, on this one. So what are the best festivals or music events out there, Tim?
Let's go there. Yes. I happen to live next about a half a block away from my favorite. I live in San Francisco, and there's the big festival in San Francisco is called Outside Lands, and it's in Golden Gate Park. It is beautiful. It's in August. So if you've ever been to San Francisco near the ocean in August, it's foggy. So it's instead of the heat that people would expect at a summer festival, you're wearing layers, but it is beautiful because it's set within the trees, and the park is so great, and they always bring in great bands. So that's probably that is my favorite festival. The band that I love the most is Pearl Jam. I've seen them 19 times out of the 300. So I've actually traveled a couple times just to see that band. And if you look behind me, for the folks who are seeing on YouTube, My Zoom background, the wall behind me are concert posters from some of my favorite bands. We've got My Morning Jacket and a couple Pearl Jam posters.
Wow, so you're a 90s grunge monster then.
Yes, I mean, yes. I think definitely I am. I grew up in the 90s and went to high school in the 90s. And so I think it's easier for me to accumulate the stats of bands that I've been with for 30 years. But I also like indie rock. I like newer bands too. It's hard for them to compete with the numbers of some of the bands that I've seen since the 90s.
So one more question, because I believe I invited you on here to talk about communication, but this is fascinating too. So have you been to any of the festivals here in the UK? Because of course we're known for our live music here.
I would love to. I haven't been, but I sometimes watch clips of the different festivals there and I think, wow, I got to get there. I've seen the Gallagher brothers perform on videos, in the UK, and I'm like, I have to see them. I hope they someday get back together, and I'm flying to the UK to see them. But what's your favorite? What's your favorite within the UK?
Oh gosh, I have so many as well, but I like Noel Gallagher's High Flying Birds. As
Yeah,
his post Oasis. I mean, I'm from Manchester originally, Tim, and we grew up on a diet of music and football, as in what you might call soccer, but is really football.
right.
So it was like you either liked both or you were cast out of Manchester. So it's 90s indie for me from Manchester, and Manchester house music, which actually has a very strong relationship with house music that was in Chicago at the time as well. So it crosses the channel, and I still love going myself as well. So so yes. Yeah, so we're both
All
there.
right. Well,
So
wait.
I'll see you in the UK. So you got to go to one of the festivals and then come back and tell us all about it, Tim. Okay.
I think we've got a next step. We got a to do on our list.
Excellent. Well, that's been a great podcast. Thank you very much for joining me. So now, let's now go on. And you are actually, as well as a music buff, you're a leadership communications expert. So one thing that fascinates me, because I work in many different businesses myself, can you explain why it appears that so many executive leaders appear to be struggling with impactful, clear, and human-centered communication?
Because it's really hard, is my first reaction to that. And I'll take that a step further. If we put ourselves in their shoes, meaning leaders of companies, senior leaders in big companies who have lots of audiences looking to them for their insight, their direction, it is so hard to take all of the things that they need to communicate effectively and then be clear, be clear about the direction strategically, but also be human, be vulnerable. There's all of these things that have to happen to do that right. And I think about Teddy Roosevelt's the man in the arena. We could say the person in the arena, the woman in the arena. It's who's ever leading the company. They're they're by nature, they're in a vulnerable position where everybody's looking to them and sometimes nitpicking at how they do it. These are people I work with, and I just see the tremendous challenge in trying to do that well. Now, there are principles which we'll get into that people who do this well tend to share, but I just want to acknowledge that it is really hard to do that thing well.
Yeah, and it does, and even for those that do it well, you've got to, it's like any sport, isn't it? You've got to keep your eye in, you've got to keep practicing, you've got to keep learning. Would you agree with that?
100%. To my premise when I started, it's that communication is a skill that is anybody can improve on it, but it takes work, and it's got to be intentional work. And again, putting yourself in the shoes of a senior executive at a large company, where is the time? So where is the time with all of the other responsibilities and stakeholders? Where's the time to then work on your craft as a communicator? Now, the ones who are great, they find it, they carve it out. And sometimes that's practicing with their own internal communications team, or practicing with their colleagues, or bringing in an outside resource, someone that does what I do to work with them. But yes, it is something that the best ones continually work at.
Well, and of course, those that don't continually work at it risk making mistakes, getting it wrong. So I'm interested from your observations as an expert in this field, what is the cost of getting communication wrong as a senior leader, particularly?
The cost is huge. It's in a way, it's like the cost is everything. I mean, let's just look at some of the outcomes that could come from getting this wrong. One, it's a disconnected workforce, a workforce that doesn't feel bought in to the strategy, or worse, doesn't feel like their work ties into the bigger picture. And that can come through the way things are being messaged. And another possible outcome of it is just strategically, there could be a lack of clarity. And if there's a lack of clarity, then there's confusion and people don't know where to start or where their boundaries are. So there's all kinds of different pain points within people struggling in this area.
Yeah, that's very true. And you mentioned actually that employees are more demanding. We know that employees have more power of choice these days as well, and they look to their leaders to inspire, to lead, to provide the direction, all of those kind of things. But what I'm interested in now is, of course, we've had a very interesting 4 or 5 years or so. So, how has the opportunity or challenge, I suppose you could say, for leaders deepened in this digital era that we're in, this fast-paced, changing digital era, the post-pandemic world? So, we're now entering the norm as hybrid working, and with these more demanding employees that you mentioned, but also potentially customers and stakeholders.
Well, I'll answer that first by thinking about what it's done for my business, and then I'll extrapolate out. I mean, it's opened the world in the last 4 years to this room that I'm sitting in right now. For example, I mean, just before this call, I'm in San Francisco. Just before this call, I had a call with someone in Dublin, Ireland. And it's not uncommon for me to then finish my day with a call with someone in Singapore or in a time zone that's on the other direction. So it's enabled us to connect with more people without travel faster. And that's a wonderful thing if we don't let it consume us and burn us out, that is. So there's barriers that need to be set about how do we deal with all of this access now that we have with one another. I'd say the other, thinking about the clients I work with and senior leaders, the main thing I've seen in terms of people succeeding in using this as an opportunity has been, it's the leaders who intentionally connect. And I think about one of my personal favorite leaders, if somebody I've coached, a client that's on my website, if you check it out as a testimonial, but her name's Monica Long, and she's the president of Ripple. And Ripple is a cross-border payments company that is in the blockchain space. And what she does is she has intentional time to listen to people, to connect, not just with the people that report to her and not just to her own stakeholders, but to skip level employees or people that are 1 or 2 levels removed from where she is. And as busy as she is, she still makes time. It's like sacred time on her calendar to listen and connect to people, because like you mentioned, over the last 3 or 4 years, that connection piece, if it's not done intentionally, it's just lost.
Yeah, and that brings me to another point. Of course, we've talked about the cost of not doing it well, but what you're getting at here is that actually, when you do get it well, there's a lot of benefits for yourself and for others. So, bringing all that together, perhaps for those tuning in, what are the most important traits and or behaviors the best leader communicators you've worked with are modeling right now, and what are the benefits for themselves as well as the organization?
For people who've listened to your podcast like I have, these won't be surprises. These are things like humility, vulnerability, authenticity, being yourself, not trying to be someone else's persona, connection, listening. And I want to underline listening for leaders in particular, because when we think about delivering a compelling vision, which is the name of a course I teach for companies, when we deliver a compelling vision, a lot of times people think about the words, the message, and that part is critical. The message, the words we choose, But where do we get the right words and the right message? It comes from listening. It comes from asking, connecting, asking people questions, and then synthesizing what you've heard and then putting that into the message. So I double underline on listening. And it really goes just back to the things that other leaders you've had on your show have communicated about being a vulnerable, open, authentic person.
That counts for so much in this well, in fact, in the digital age, I would say the human touch is more important than ever, and that really plays out from a human-centered leadership perspective. And you refer to the things that you do with leaders all around the world. So I'm interested to go a little bit deeper into the detail about that and ask you about how you go about working with leaders, particularly in accelerating their critical communication competencies. And as you do that within for and with those leaders, can you identify what makes the biggest difference in communication terms to employees?
Not a surprise again for listeners of your podcast, but authenticity is at the top of the list. It is the most critical piece of good communication for anyone. And what do I mean by authenticity for a communicator? Because I think that's worth unpacking. It is sounding like you are familiar and comfortable with your audience, even if you don't have a familiarity or comfort. It's being comfortable within yourself to sound like you do when you talk to people that you know really well, or a friend at work. I sometimes do an exercise in my workshops where I have people record themselves talking about their top priority at work for just 30 seconds, and then they watch it back. And then I immediately have them go film a second clip on their smartphone. And that one is, I want them to talk about something personal, someone in their life that they love, or something, their pet, their best friend, their spouse. And I want them to look at the two different delivery styles that they see. Usually what they see is in the first clip where they're talking about the number one priority they have at work, they see more seriousness. They see less body language. They see less energy. And that's because when we're talking about work, we usually are focused on accuracy, getting it right. When we're in storytelling mode, which is where they're going in that second video example, everything changes. The body language changes, the warmth, the connection changes. We don't overthink the words because we're not as concerned with it. We dive into the story, and then the audience comes along with us. So in reality, there isn't one that's better than the other of those two modes. We actually need to be good at both. We need to be able to deliver the strategy using the work voice that we have, which is still our authentic voice. And then we need to be able to go into storytelling mode too. I look at it this way. It is the ability to speak to the audience's left and right brain as communicators. The left brain would be, this is where we're given the detail, the strategy. The right brain is, this is where I'm giving them something to visualize, the story, the metaphor, the action.
Yeah, I get the first thing that you said about familiarity with the audience, and also being familiar with about yourself, being comfortable in yourself, the natural you allowing you to come out, and that comfort level allows you to communicate in a much more natural way, I suppose. And you're touching on skill sets there, storytelling being the one big one at the moment. So what other pure skill sets would you say support then? So I'm going to show up with the authentic me. What are the other things that I can do from a communications skills toolkit perspective that really engage and buy in my audience?
Starting off strong is one of the first things I work with my clients on. There is a book called Smart Brevity that, if you haven't checked it out, I would recommend it. And it is part of the concepts within Smart Brevity talk about when you're communicating either via email or verbally, it's about grabbing the audience's attention right away. Why is this important? Do something that's kind of eye-opening, or like a hook. Some people have described it. So we think, when I work with somebody or when I work with teams, we often start right there is, okay, what are you trying to convey? And how do we want to start? How do we want to engage? Now, different ways we can engage at the beginning are things like leading with a story or describing the pain point in detail, using a data point, engaging the audience through some kind of question. There's lots of different ways to start at the beginning, but starting off strong is critical. And then it gets people sort of in rhythm to flow into the rest of what they want to say. So that's a big one. Another one is, as you've heard me alluding to, it is think about the audience. What does this particular audience need? Because each audience is a little bit different. So I have a checklist that I go through with my clients when I'm doing one-on-one coaching. I have a checklist that I want them to think through, and they're really obvious questions, but they're things that we don't take time to think about often because we're so busy. But it's things like, okay, who is my audience? How much do they know about what I'm about to say? If it's work, it's what conflicting or complementary priorities might they have with this? Meaning, okay, will there be some barriers already, or does this blend right into what their priorities are? And then think a bit about what other questions could I proactively answer within my audience. So that's another big one. And then the last one I'll mention here is working within a framework called Answer Intelligence that I've been playing with for most of this year. The short version on this is Answer Intelligence is a framework that helps people answer questions in an elevated way. But I like to use it as a communication framework, meaning that if we can think about the main questions most audiences have and bake answers into our message, then we're already ahead of the game. And a quick example on that is most audiences have some form of what am I being asked to do? Why is this important now? And then how will it work? Some form of a what, a why, and a how question are on most audiences' minds. So if we proactively address that just in the way we message, and it's not that hard to do, we're ahead of the game.
So is that the answer intelligence that you're talking about? Being able to say, so you're probably asking yourselves the why, what, and how. So let me break that down for you right now. Is that what you mean by answer intelligence, or is it deeper than that?
Yeah, it is. It can be a lot of things. I mean, in its pure form, answer intelligence is the art and science of answering questions better. So if you're asking me questions right now, there are research-backed ways for me to be answering your question and doing it in a way that appeals to your audience's left and right brain, which I could break down. But in the case of how am I using it within storytelling or communication, it is exactly what you're saying. It is a simple phrase like, you're probably asking yourself, why is this important? Or why are we doing this right now? So let me answer that. Let me start by answering the why. And if I start with why, I'm going to give a bit of some strategy or a theory type answer, and then I'm going to try to back it up with a story. If I put those two parts together, now I've engaged the audience's left and right brain, and I'm going to do the same thing with the what and the how question, trying to hit the left and right brain with each one. It sounds like a lot. I've got some videos recorded on my social media that people can check out to break it down a little bit further. But it really is as simple as just thinking about what does my audience need? And can I provide that in how I'm communicating?
Yeah, great. And I'll ask you for those social media links at the end, Tim. And just going back actually a step to when we started this part of the conversation, and you mentioned the book Smart Brevity, and that starting with a bang or with a big headline that sort of grabs the attention. And then you've talked about the story, you've talked about the tailoring and so on. And there is another element to that communication, which is the so what element. How do you bake in that so what, or the benefits for the audience or the individual that you're talking to, in a way that speaks to their left and right brain, as you talked about?
It goes back to thinking about, how do I answer the main questions? So if you're thinking about leading with, all right, I'm going to communicate this change, this process change to my team or to my organization or to my clients or whoever your audience is, it's thinking, okay, what am I asking them to do? And can I answer that clearly? Then why? Why am I asking them to do this right now? And that is critical. The why would be, again, I want to give them some rational elements to the why, and then I'm going to give them a story to back it up. It could be as simple as, we recently have seen this, and I'm going to tell a story where this has come into play. So it's about, what's in it for me is literally just answering the what question and then answering the why question.
Right, yeah, and I'm going to put you on the spot in a minute as well, because I'm sure a lot of those tuning in will want to say, right, okay, I've got presentations coming up, or I've got meetings coming up. They're pretty high stakes. I want to get this right. But I couldn't agree more with you there. That storytelling, that reinforcing what's in it for them, and starting with some of these critical questions is a great way to present or to communicate to groups, to individuals, to whatever. So for the leaders who are here saying, right, I know I can be better at this, what would be your 5 or so tips for them to accelerate their communication skills development, which would have an immediate impact?
Let's start with be yourself, authenticity, which is, I think, the top of the mountain. And it is not something that you just turn on. It is, to me, that one's a lifelong journey. It's how can I show more of myself appropriate to the situation, and how can I continually show more vulnerability, more authenticity, and also show more command of the topic as I'm doing so. It's, to me, this is something I'm always working on. I feel like it was a big shift earlier in my career to go from, I want to get it right, I want to sound like I know what I'm doing, to actually, I do know what I'm doing. And let me be real. Let me speak real. So authenticity is at the absolute top. The next one, I'm recapping a bit of what we've already talked about, but it's put your audience first. And by put your audience first, I'll mention there's a lot of ways to do this. It's answering or asking yourself the questions that they may be asking, the what, the why, the how, but it's also about tailoring the content in an appropriate altitude. I'll use that term, altitude. Do they need to have the really, like, the 30,000 foot view of this, or do they need to be right close to the ground on it? Another analogy I use, or metaphor, is it's kind of like a reading level if you've heard the phrase, newspapers are written at like a 6th or 7th, 8th grade reading level, and that's so a broader audience can grasp it. But if it's a scientific journal, it's probably going to be written at a much higher reading level. And so think about that when especially for the leaders who are talking about technical information, it's tailor it based on who's in this audience. Do I have a mixed audience where some people are not technical and some people are super technical? Okay, well, maybe I hit in the middle, or maybe I go between technical and non-technical, or bring in more stories. So it's make it about the audience and engage them as best as you can. Next one would be speak to the audience's left and right brain, which we've covered a couple different times. I haven't said it this way, and that most of the issue that I see with leaders who don't land their message as well as they can, or don't inspire the audiences, they spend all of their time speaking to the left brain of the audience. And that's human nature. If I'm asked to give an answer, I'm usually going to go to the left brain. Here's the logical, here's the rational, the strategic reason that I'm doing X, Y, or Z. But what we're leaving out when we do it that way is all of the stuff that connects emotionally. The creative part, as Simon Sinek calls it, the limbic brain. That's the part where people have instincts, gut reactions, intuition. This is the part where people see the vision, feel the vision, connect with it. So it's about having a balance between answering in left and right brain terminology, or having both elements. Next one is a delivery tip. It's probably the most important of all delivery tips, and that is pause. If people are fast speakers, they've heard for most of their professional life, you got to slow down. And slowing down, it's not the greatest advice. I think you need to be authentic. So if you're a fast speaker, stay that way, but just pause. Pause after key phrases. If you've got an engaging opening idea, pause after it and let the audience absorb it. Take a breath. The other nice benefit of pausing is it replaces filler words. So if we're using a bunch of filler words, the fix there, and it's not an easy fix, is pause instead of saying like. So pausing is the thing that most quickly amps up the way you're perceived as a communicator. And then the fifth tip would be listen, be a listener. Being a great communicator is part of it is a huge part of it is listening, asking good questions. And then when it's time for you to speak or share a vision or put together a vision, that listening makes the message resonate even better. A tip I learned long ago at the firm I worked at earlier in my career is when you can listen and then reference things you've heard from your audience to the audience, it just connects even better.
Yeah, that I understand. That's very much a learned skill, and that's something that I've learned and that resonates with me in terms of the power of it, I have to say. And you've mentioned some really important points here, and going back right to the beginning about being yourself, you alluded to the junior you, where it was, I've got to get this right, I've got to get this right. And it's very hard to be yourself. So what might be your advice to the younger you? It says, yeah, you might not be as experienced as some people are in your audience, but
But relax. You've done your homework, you've prepared, you've studied, you know what you want to say. Now just do it. Connect with the audience. They don't know if you make a mistake because they don't have your talk track. They don't know what you've prepared. They are not critiquing you, actually. They're just trying to gain a thing or two from what you're saying. And if it doesn't go great, they're going to move on to their next meeting anyway. So try your best to just relax, engage the audience, and connect on the things that you've prepared.
yeah, easy to say, I think, but for some people that might be hard to do. Sometimes actually within this game of communication or presentation, wherever we are, we've got to experience that bit of that the things that don't go quite so well to learn from them. Would you agree with that?
100%. The biggest fear that people have in public speaking is forgetting where they're going to go and just freezing in front of an audience. And early in my communication coaching career, it happened to me. I was probably a couple months into being a facilitator and traveling around the world and speaking to large companies. And I remember I was at a large tech company in San Francisco, and I actually froze. I forgot where I was going in front of them. It was one of those handoffs from a facilitator, my co-facilitator, to me, and I wasn't sure where I was supposed to go. And I just froze for like 5 or 10 seconds. And I had to go over and whisper to my co-facilitator, "Can you take it from here?" And she did and ran with it, and everything was fine. But I felt like I was drenched in sweat, and I thought, can I just disappear? I have to get back up here in like 5 or 10 minutes during my next section, and I have to come across like the person who knows the expert. And I just wanted to get in a Uber or a taxi and just get out of town. And what I told myself in that moment is all I can do is get back there and just do the best I can. And I did. And I remember the first time I came back to that audience, there were a couple people kind of looking to see what's going to happen here. They remembered that I just sort of froze. And the first sentence or two I got out, I felt I wanted to get confidently out, and I did. And then everything kind of resumed. The takeaway I had for this is that I thought I was going to be fired. I thought I was done. My career was over before it even started. I was mortified to see the results, the survey results that I got on that particular workshop. And then when I did get them, I took a deep breath. I looked at them and I saw I actually scored really well. And I thought to myself, how is that possible? I had the most epic fail of my career in front of this audience. But I think the takeaway for me was I kept going. And actually, in a way, when you do make a mistake like that, you actually ingratiate yourself to your audience in a different way, because everybody has either they've personally experienced it or they can identify with, oh, he's human, they're human, just like me. And they kept going and they tried their best. So in a weird way, there's this, you connect it even better sometimes when you move on and you're human about it and you just keep going. And so after I had that epic failure, which I see it at that moment, I sort of freed me up from the fear of failure, because I've seen it. And I see that if that's as bad as it can get, okay, it's not that bad.
Yeah, I get that. In fact, you sort of demonstrate two sides of the same coin there. You demonstrate the vulnerability first, but then the courage second to get up again. And that plays right back to the authentic you and the fact that we're all not perfect, no matter what your level is within the organization. Be yourself as that first point you raise. I really understand why that's so important now, Tim. Thank you. And then it's about putting your audience first. You talked about speak to the audience's left and right hand side of the brain. I like that a lot. We have to speak to that. I think you coined it as instinct and gut as well, as much as the logical side of the argumentation or the communication that you want. And at times, pause, because it's powerful and it stops you saying sometimes, even though I still say that quite a lot sometimes when I'm in the flow, particularly talking too quickly, like you just talked about.
Well, let's
And
talk about that one.
oh, go on then, go on.
If we spin off on that one, because I teach people how to reduce their filler words, but I also teach them that the most important thing is be yourself. So how can those two things reconcile? How can you both be perfect and not say or ever, and then also be yourself? Those two things are completely at odds with each other. So I've come around on how this is. I think using some ums and uhs or fillers, it's not the end of the world. It's totally fine. Our goal is self-awareness, reduce the amount of fillers that you have. If you're using 5 in a minute, cut it to 2 in a minute. And that's a good goal to have. But the primary thing is be yourself and be comfortable being yourself, and don't get into a negative self-talk if you're catching yourself doing a bunch of ums and uhs. It's just notice it and try to be a little bit better.
Well, I feel like I've had a bit of free coaching here as well, Tim. I'm going to be far more confident now when I'm presenting more, doing these podcasts, whatever it is. Thank you very much. And thank you very much for joining me. I am very sure that many of those tuning in would love to get in touch, find out more, keep the conversation going. How do they get in touch? And you mentioned some videos as well. Where do they go to find them?
My website is 40wattcoaching.com, 40coaching.com, 40watt coaching.com. And then also most of my content goes out on LinkedIn, all of my content. So just look up Tim Fortescue on LinkedIn, Fortescue. And then you'll have access to a lot of the videos that I put out.
Perfect. Tim, thanks very much for joining me. It's been great.
Jeremy, thank you for having me. It's been fun to chat with you. And I also want to compliment your communication and your authenticity. And thanks for doing what you do.
Oh, great. I got a tick in the box or a check in the box, I should say, from Tim. Tim, goodbye.
Bye.
Thanks for tuning in to the Rethink Leadership podcast with me, Jeremy Blain. Please like, comment, and support us on your favourite platform, and subscribe to our YouTube channel where you can watch as well as listen to each episode.